Flaying alive is one of those punishments that sits in the darker margins of human history, rare, extreme, and almost always used when a ruler or empire wanted to send a message that words alone could not deliver. Even hearing the term can make people recoil, yet understanding why it existed tells us far more about societies than the punishment itself. It reveals how justice, fear, and political control blended in eras where the state often relied on terror as much as law. Most people today imagine flaying as something out of a nightmare, but in the ancient and medieval world, it appeared in legal codes, royal chronicles, and diplomatic reports. It was never routine. It was reserved for those considered traitors, rebels, or symbols of defiance, individuals whose fate was meant to echo far beyond their final moments. In this way, flaying was less a method of punishment and more a form of psychological warfare. To see how this played out, we can look at several societies where flaying was documented. The Assyrians, for example, left inscriptions describing the punishment inflicted on rebellious governors or captured enemy leaders. These inscriptions weren't meant to shock modern readers. They were meant to intimidate neighboring kingdoms. When an Assyrian king carved a record of a rebel's fate onto a palace wall, he wasn't preserving justice. He was broadcasting dominance. He wanted every visitor, diplomat, or rival ruler to know the cost of defiance. Centuries later, medieval Europe adopted similar logic. In England, for instance, a man named Pierre de la Brosse, an unpopular royal advisor, was reportedly threatened with flaying during a political crisis in the late 13th century. He ultimately faced another form of execution, but the threat alone reveals how deeply the punishment lived in the medieval imagination. Historical records from parts of Eastern Europe, Persia, and Central Asia describe similar cases, usually tied to treason, espionage, or violent rebellion. In these contexts, flaying was not just physical punishment. It was a symbol of the ruler's authority and the state's power to make an example of those who challenged it. Perhaps one of the most well-known stories comes from the Persian Empire. Herodotus recounts an episode involving a corrupt judge named Sisamnes. According to the historian, when the Persian king discovered Sisamnes had taken a bribe, he ordered him to face the harshest punishment available. But the deeper message came afterward. The king supposedly used the judge's fate as a reminder by having the courtroom chair covered in the man's skin, so his son, appointed as the next judge, would sit upon justice. Whether this happened precisely as described is debated among modern scholars. Herodotus loved to blend moral lessons with political warnings. Still, the tale reflects how ancient societies linked extreme punishment with public memory. The story endured because it communicated an idea. Corruption corrodes the state, and rulers might go to shocking lengths to purify it. In medieval law codes, flaying served a similar symbolic function. In some jurisdictions, it was reserved for officials who abused their authority. That might sound contradictory to modern ears. After all, how can a system punish injustice with brutality? But in the medieval worldview, justice wasn't solely about proportionality. It was about restoring cosmic and social order. When the person violating the law was part of the ruling structure itself, the punishment had to demonstrate the state's integrity. A severe fate became a declaration of moral legitimacy. The Mongol world provides another angle. Although the Mongols are often portrayed as universally brutal, their legal system was surprisingly strict and consistent. Extreme punishments were used sparingly, but when a city resisted or betrayed them, the consequences could be devastating. Chroniclers describe a few cases where officers of conquered regions were subjected to severe penalties for breaking oaths or committing treason. Again, the point was not cruelty for cruelty's sake. It was deterrence. The Mongols understood that fear could prevent future uprisings more effectively than constant warfare. In Europe, the association between flaying and treason persisted well into the late medieval period. When rebellions threatened the crown, kings often used exaggerated threats to maintain stability. Chronicles from France and England record instances where rebel leaders feared flaying if captured. Whether or not the punishment was carried out in every case is unclear. Medieval chroniclers sometimes heighten drama, but the fact that people believed the threat speaks volumes. It's worth noting that despite the dramatic stories, flaying remained extremely rare. Even rulers known for severity, like Timur in Central Asia or Ivan the Terrible in Russia, used it sparingly, if at all. Most executions took far more standardized forms. That rarity actually amplified the punishment's impact. If people knew it happened only under extraordinary circumstances, the psychological effect was that much stronger. A ruler didn't need to inflict it regularly. The fear of the possibility was enough. Understanding this helps us see the method in a broader historical frame. In societies without modern policing or communication systems, public punishment was one of the few tools rulers had to shape behavior. They needed people to believe that rebellion or corruption would bring consequences that extended beyond the individual. Extreme punishments served as political spectacles, teaching lessons about loyalty, obedience, and the state's absolute authority. Of course, looking back today, it's impossible not to feel discomfort. It raises questions about justice, power, and what societies are capable of when fear becomes a governing tool. Flaying sits at the extreme edge of a long continuum of punishments, one that includes mutilation, branding, banishment, and other penalties designed as much to frighten the public as to discipline the accused. Studying it forces us to confront how past civilizations balanced order and humanity, often leaning heavily toward the former at the expense of the latter. But it also offers insight into human resilience. Many historical accounts of flaying emphasize not just the suffering inflicted, but the moral message the victim embodied. Some were rebels fighting for freedom, others corrupt officials brought down by their own actions. Each story became part of a larger narrative about right, wrong, and the consequences societies believed necessary to preserve order. Today, the punishment stands as a reminder of how far justice systems have evolved. Modern societies reject cruelty as a tool of governance, prizing due process, proportionality, and human rights. Understanding the brutality of the past without sensationalizing it helps reinforce why those principles matter. Flaying alive was never common, but its shadow stretches through history because of what it represented: fear, control, and the immense power once concentrated in the hands of rulers. By examining it carefully and responsibly, we learn not just about violence, but about the complex worlds that produced it, and how far humanity has come in redefining justice.